Peter and myself again.
Hello.
Hello to you. Thank you for being with us again. And we're going to be talking about preaching with flow. That's our theme, our topic for today. Preaching with flow.
Small word, big impact.
Very much so.
But it's not something we talk about much as preachers. I don't think. I can't think of reading much in terms of preaching textbooks about the flow of the message. But yeah, I think it's an important one because as a listener, you know when it's not flowing. You can sense the preacher's got stuck, the preacher's lost momentum, the preacher is not moving forwards. All those kind of feelings you feel as a listener, and you can feel it as a preacher too.
Yeah, I was just thinking that exact thing. Is it maybe worse as you're preaching and you're thinking there's something blocking the flow
This isn't
of what I'm
working.
doing. It's not working. Yeah.
So we want to think about what causes that or what can we do about it. And I think probably to just work our way through three kind of areas of the whole preaching process to consider. And the first one is the actual preparation of the sermon itself. So, piece of paper and a pen or a Word document or however you do the work, you're producing the outline, maybe producing the wording, producing the content and getting that written down. At that stage, how can what you do affect the flow of your sermon? Any thoughts?
Yeah. Two come to mind quite quickly in terms of the sort of pre-preaching process is firstly you have to know where you're going. Like I have to know the not just the direction of travel, but actually where I'm ending up, where I'm landing. My message flow implies a direction of travel, I think, and or at least a movement towards something. And you have to know before you preach, you have to know where it is you want to get to, because otherwise you're going to flow in a whole different direction.
Yeah, and sometimes you can flow sideways. Is that a thing?
Kind of just out. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, and one way that that comes out, I think, is sometimes preachers will say, "Oh, and another thing,"
Mm.
as if it's just come to mind, or a more calm and another thing. But it's almost like instead of moving forwards towards the goal, I'm moving sideways to add something that I want to say. So it's like I've got 30 minutes, whatever the time is, and I've done a whole load of study, and I'm just kind of sharing thoughts that are disconnected from each other, but are all connected to the thing that I'm preaching. And so, oh, and another thing. And it just kind of loses the momentum, the sense of forward progress. That's a very different feel, I think, for a listener than A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D. There's a progression, a sense of going somewhere. You'll go with a preacher quite easily when that's happening. But when it's a, oh, to, oh, oranges, it's like you're moving sideways instead of progressing forwards.
Yeah, and just in terms of how communication works, that does not work. That's not how we communicate, and I think it can be helpful. Well, it's more than just it's helpful. I think it's pretty compulsory that when we're preparing to preach, we have to know the aim of the message that we're going to preach, and to know that we need to know who we're preaching to, but we need to know the passages, the aim of the passage and the text that we're preaching as well, and that's going to affect the aim and the goal. And then when we're preparing, we need to really strip off everything that isn't helping us to go to that end point. Like that's, I think, fundamental for thinking about flow. Is this section? Is this illustration? This point? What kind of whatever part of the message it is? Is it helping me take these people to the goal? That's what flowing is, and connected with that, which is the second thing that came to mind as you were talking about the flow in preaching is the importance of transitions and good transitions. I think we've talked about this in other places, but just transitions can help flow, or it can hinder and stop flow. And one of the things that I tend to notice, well, I try to avoid in my preaching, and so I kind of tend to notice sometimes in other people's, where where the flow stops is when people say, "And now my second point is this." For me, that just stops. Like if I'm kind of in appreciating the flow of a message, and someone goes, "Okay, great. Second point. My second point is this." I don't think that's how we talk normally.
Now, some people may find that quite striking because that's literally the way they've heard preaching and the way they've been taught to preach.
Yeah.
So let me just kind of unpack that a little bit. I think what can happen in that moment is you were, as a listener, experiencing the sermon. So you're experiencing the text, you're experiencing the message, you're in the flow, you're going with the flow. When the preacher says, "And now my second point," it's like the bubbles burst and you're back to consciously being aware that this preacher has an outline that they're working through.
Yeah.
And I think that is kind of part of the issue. It's almost like technically everyone knows they've got an outline. Probably not everyone, but most people would know the preacher has an outline. The preacher's following the outline. That's fine. But in the moment, it doesn't feel like that. It feels like you're caught up in the story or you're caught up in the argument of the passage, whatever it is. And to say something as abrupt as, "And my second point," it's like you jump out and go, he's following an outline.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's just not how we. I don't think it's how we talk normally. I think I think we want to be thinking about preaching messages as a narrative thing. So not to say that we're just telling story kind of in our preaching, but just the kind of how communication works is in a narrative way, and just just sort of adding chapter breaks into preaching a message. I think can just jar a lot and interrupts the flow because we're not. I don't think we're supposed to preach outlines. Like you said, we need outlines. We need transitions in how we talk and how we communicate. But we don't just preach the words that we've written down in an outline. We're preaching a message.
That's right. And I think the outline serves us, the preacher. It's not really for the listener. And so if you think of the outline being the skeleton of the thought, some people do preach a very bony message and it could be very clear and very easy to follow and so on. But I think really what people are following or listening to is the flesh of the message. It's the image, the thought, the idea, the different aspects of that, which are hung on the outline of the skeleton. But if you make the skeleton the focus, then it's hard for the listener's experience to feel natural, because that's not natural. If I'm telling you about my morning and my experience with the car and the mechanic, I don't say, "And my third point is this."
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like, I've got a pre-prepared thing, rather than feeling like I'm recounting what happened.
Yeah, and in a 2-minute story, you don't need those sort of memory aids. You don't need to recap in a 1 minute, 2-minute story. But when you're preaching, you need transitions because you're moving through what you're communicating, and so yeah, we said transitions are important.
I'm absolutely not saying we don't need transitions,
Yeah.
and nor are you. But I think the point is that the transitions, if they're thought through, can maintain flow.
Exactly.
So instead of the abruptness of stepping out of the experience of the message to have a transition that sounds like moving through an outline, why not have a transition that maintains the flow but gives whatever's necessary to bring people with you? So I've probably used the illustration before that I've heard from someone, that you're preaching, you're riding the motorcycle and your listeners are on the back. And so you can go in a straight line at high speed, no problem. But if you're going to take a turn, which is a transition, you need to slow down or else they're going to fall off. And so we're not saying that you don't have a transition. You do have curves that you need to go through in the course of preaching, but you don't hit a brick wall, regroup, get on the bike, and then start again.
Yeah.
That's too abrupt. Equally, you don't just carry on as if nothing's happening at full speed, because you lose people. So it's that slowing down. So for example, instead of saying, "And now for my second point," you could say, "So we've seen this," and you describe what you've seen, a little bit of a flashback, but there's more to it than that. And so people are still with you, they're still hanging in there. We're also going to see this. And so you transition. So I've looked back, you've said there's something more, you've moved into that, and now you're moving in that direction.
Yeah, and you can even sort of throw forward and say, we've seen this. There's also this, but before we get there,
Mm-hmm.
there's this, or there's different ways of doing it, but just in a way that I kind of actually fits into a narrative way of communicating, and it's just helpful for people, and keeps people in like in the flow, which is sort of the whole point.
Sometimes a transition can be very, very brief.
Mm.
Furthermore, also,
Yeah.
that's a transition.
Yeah.
It's a sort of an addition to what's been said already. But if you want to slow down through that, you can say, we have seen this, and also, and then it's just that slight extension, slight slowing down. But that doesn't mean that you have to lose momentum or you have to get stuck or any of the flow challenges. So yeah, I think the transitions need to be thought through while you're thinking through the content and the end goal, like you said. But then there's a second kind of category that we want to think about. It's not the preparation of the sermon on paper, it's the bit between that and actually preaching it. So the sort of pre-delivery hours, whatever that time is, the evening before, the morning of, whatever, you've got that chunk of time. And I think you and I are both the same in this. We will run through our message.
Yeah.
But I know some people don't.
Right.
Some people will look at their outline, they'll think through their outline, they might pray through their outline. But the first time the words come across their lips, it's as they're preaching it. I don't see the point of that. I feel like, why miss the opportunity? Because for one thing, I can prepare a message, and I've been doing this for years, and I've done lots of preaching, lots of experience, lots of training, etc., etc. I can prepare a message that makes complete sense to me on paper, and I can say, yes, that's great. Then I can say, right, I should run this through, and I run it through, and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So what's going on there? There's a blockage. There's something that isn't coming out the way it makes sense on paper, but it just doesn't work, on your lips, kind of thing. And so I think that's why it's really important to say, okay, having prepared the message, I'm going to run through the message and make sure this thing works, that this flows.
Words on a page are different to words in a mouth. They're in that kind of sense that obviously you can learn to write in a way that you speak, but until the words have come out of your mouth, actually thinking about how you how you transition is another example. We talk about transition, but how you transition, how you do that, it is hard to capture on a page of notes or a page of an outline. You can just the thought of when to pause, how you pause, the things you pause for. Just that's hard to do without actually doing it out loud, and again, I think we both kind of find it hard to. We don't tend to do those verbal run throughs with anyone that can in anywhere close to us that can hear us. It just feels a bit, I don't know why. I know in a few days' time I'm going to preach it to however many people, but when I'm running through, I'm like I can't handle it if someone's in the room or if I know someone can hear it. It's a strange thing, but it has to be out loud for me,
yeah,
and for you too, and yeah, just work it out. And sometimes you can feel it because it's better to experience something not flowing when it's you practicing in your room than when you're doing it for real.
That's right. And I think sometimes it can be the tiniest thing that you discover as you're trying to say it isn't working. So it could be not a transition you'd write on an outline, but a simple transition within a point. So you've explained something in the text, you've made a comment about it, and then you have an illustration, and it may be just the simple flow from the explanation into the illustration that just doesn't work, and then you find yourself say, "Well, so I've got an illustration. Well, my illustration here," and you start talking about illustrations instead of flowing into the content of what you want to say next. Much better to find that out while you're running it through on your own than when you're speaking that to a crowd of people who are looking at you and wondering why you're stuck. And so, yeah, it could be a sort of micro transition. It could be the flow from one thing to the next, which is kind of the same thing. It could be, oh, I'm explaining something, but actually I need to explain this later point sooner before I get to this. You may need to rearrange content. And actually, I find there are times when, even in the earlier writing the sermon phase, I get stuck. And instead of just plowing on through, I'll put the pen down, I'll stop writing or typing as it is, and I'll just stand up and preach. Even though I don't know all my message, I'll just preach it out loud, and that can unstick me. Can break that logjam, and I can get flowing and get the message worked out from that. So I think it's important to run through the message to make sure that it flows. And if it does, you've then heard it, which is another benefit. You know, it's not just I've seen, you know, I've planned the notes, I've prepared the notes, I've seen the notes. It's all very visual, but there's a part of our brain that works with hearing. And so having preached it out loud, I've heard it in my own voice, which helps me then recall it as I'm preaching it.
Right. Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's good.
So that's the second phase, if you like. First phase, writing the message. Second phase would be that kind of pre-preaching run through to make sure that it flows and to spot where you're getting stuck and think through how you can overcome that, because you can do a lot better thinking at that stage when you're not also thinking about these people are listening and I've got to keep going. We don't want to be doing our thinking while we're preaching as much as possible. So get some thinking back into the run through phase. But then there is that phase of actually preaching it. So you're standing up, whatever your circumstance, preaching to this crowd of people, you know, 10 or 10,000, whatever. These people are listening, and something that made sense on paper and ran through just like it was perfectly, you know, lubricated with WD-40. Are we allowed to mention brands? I don't know. We're not important, so we can. You know, it just flowed. It was perfect in the run through, and then you're preaching, and you lose momentum. You get stuck. I think, just thinking about that, I think there's some dynamics between the persons involved. So you've got the preacher, you've got the listeners. Just those two to start with. What are some of the dynamics there?
Well, some of the things you can notice, I think people's facial reactions, or people's fidgeting reactions sometimes can tell a lot.
If everyone's clearing their voice, clearing their throat, they're probably bothered.
There's something not quite there. It can so sometimes it can simply be, you know, like a bottle or a Bible falling on the floor. We've talked about that in another episode about distractions and interruptions, and sometimes that can really interrupt flow. Is, you know, you feel like maybe you are flowing, and then there's a noise or there's something that kind of stops that. That's not exactly what we're talking about here, but that is an important part of flow.
It is, but I think what we're thinking about more is that sort of subtle, it's almost subconscious. You've got the sense this isn't working, or they're not getting it.
Yeah, and you can feel that because sometimes there really is the sense that this is flowing and there is something happening. And it's when, and we're talking about this issue because there are times when you don't feel that, and it's kind of, well, where's that come from? But so that me and the listener connection or disconnection.
So there's the kind of the facial response and the fidgety response of the listener. There's also what's going on inside me, because there's a whole load of thoughts and emotions swirling in the moment that weren't there when I was running it through the night before. And so, you know, I might be getting nervous because of their response. I also might be bothered by my own, that introduction wasn't good. I missed a key line, and now I'm past it. There's nothing I can do. You could have this kind of internal dialogue with yourself, and it could be looking forward to where you're going in the message. It could be looking back to something where you feel like I've dropped the ball there. It could be that kind of present tense sense of I'm feeling stuck. This isn't communicating. I've lost momentum. So there's all that kind of stuff, which actually that it's affected by the people there, but it's just happening inside you.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's inside you, there's the responses from them. There's also kind of what you hinted at there. There's definite moments where you think, wow, I can feel that God's working here. Okay. So God is moving. People are quiet. They're leaning in. They're attentive. It's almost like an electric atmosphere, and you can sometimes sense that. Sometimes you can't, and then you can be troubled, and that's not always bad news. Sometimes God is working and you just don't feel it. That's perfectly possible.
Yeah, the amount of times you can finish preaching and think that bombed, and then someone will come up and in a really kind way just say, "Oh, thank you. That was really what I needed today." You're like, "Oh, okay, Lord, it felt like you weren't here,
Yeah.
but you were. I'm sorry, but thank you." Yeah, you can feel that too.
Definitely don't want to trust our kind of our own internal barometer of the spiritual temperature of a room.
Yeah,
I mean, just be thankful that sometimes you do feel it, but don't panic when you don't.
yeah,
But if that's true, which I believe it is, that God can be, and we're praying that God will be at work while we're preaching, well, then it means that other spiritual realm stuff can be going on.
yeah,
And
right.
so the enemy can also be playing into it. Don't want to overstate that, but it would be naive to ignore it.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly if you've ever preached a kind of a clear gospel presentation, it does seem like when you get to the key moment where, you know, every heart has been drawn to the cross and you're thinking about Jesus's death in our place, there's something about that moment that seems to trigger every siren in town, every child in the nursery, you know, every bottle tips over, every phone goes on. I mean, it's just bizarre. But maybe it's a thing, right? That there's a spiritual battle raging around us. And so that can play into it too. And so there may be a sense in which it would be wise to pray about that and to even have others that are sensitized to that, that they might also be praying at key moments. So all of those things are at work in the moment of preaching. And so it's not that if you get perfect content and if you have a really clean run through, then guaranteed it's going to go well. You can still get stuck. So what do? When you're preaching and suddenly you find yourself tripping over your own thoughts, tripping over your own words, starting to circle and not make progress? How do you get out of that? Is it just like a death spin? You know, like I'm in a plane and I don't know how to stop this, you know, roll that's happening. There's got to be a way out. What can you do, Mike?
Yeah, partly I want to be a preacher who prays quicker or sooner in those kind of situations. So we will talk about like things that you can do and things you can say maybe, but I think I want to preface it by saying in my mind I tend to go too quickly to, okay, what can I do to get out of this? And like you said, there's 100% a spiritual, well, it's more than a spiritual element to preaching. It's a spiritual thing. And so if I'm sort of feeling that struggle with the flow and different things, I kind of, well, okay, Lord, can you help, not just help me to get out of it so it doesn't look as bad, but like, can you help this to flow? Can you work in me, work in my, you know, in the listeners? I certainly want to be someone who, yeah, prays quicker.
It's sort of the arrow prayer type thing, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's like help.
Yeah, like you don't have to stop for 2 minutes and just, yeah, let me, you know, give me 2 minutes while I pray for help. You know, I'm not kind of saying that, but just that quick. You know, the Spirit knows my heart, knows the heart of the listeners. He knows what's going on. So, okay, Lord, help, please. And then within that, maybe it's okay to pause and say, okay, I don't think I've communicated or I've clarifying what I'm saying very well. Let me just have another go. Let me just do that again.
Yeah, I think you're on to like that actual, how do you verbally express a kind of a restart of the current point or the current thought? It's almost like a spectrum. I'm thinking of maybe 3 places on that. So what you've just described is kind of the middle of what I'm thinking.
Okay.
It's like you don't want to put the blame on the listener. Right? You don't want to say, you don't look like you're getting this. Yeah. Oh, let me try again for your sake. Yeah. You know, like, don't give people the impression it's their issue. It's your issue. Yeah. But you can say, I don't think I've explained that very well. Let me try again. Like that, and then you've kind of created a break. Right. Then you can come at it again. The more extreme would be to acknowledge, I think I've got tied up here. I'm stuck. I just need a second to regroup my thoughts apologies. You can go there. You don't want to do that all the time.
Yeah, if you're doing that every week or something, then
People will start to get worried about
you're
you.
a bit nervous. Yeah, it's okay to be vulnerable
Yeah.
as a preacher. In fact, you should be vulnerable.
And it's
and humble
okay
as a
to
preacher.
admit I'm stuck or I've lost my flow of thought.
Yeah,
You don't want to do that 3 times a message or every week, because you'll lose credibility. People think, well, why are you preaching? You don't seem capable. But it's good to know you've got that option. If I'm really stuck and I've really totally spaced what I'm trying to say, I always have the option of admitting I've totally spaced what I'm trying to say. And that feels like the worst thing in the world to the preacher, but actually to the listeners, they go, yeah, we know. We could tell. Like, that's fine. So
Yeah,
there's
totally.
that kind of more extreme option of sort of admit and apologize. There's the middle of the road. I don't think I'm explaining this very well. Let me try a different way. And then there's the don't acknowledge what you're doing, just do it. The kind of the very soft end where you're saying something, you're getting a bit stuck, take a breath, pause, and go again.
Yeah.
The listeners may not know that that wasn't your plan. So it could be very subtle. But what you don't want to do is stay stuck, where you feel like I've lost momentum, I've lost my place in my message, I've lost what I'm trying to say, I'm just going to waffle until I find it. People then are suffering through that loss of momentum for several minutes, sometimes the rest of the message. And so somehow in there, pray first, and then either acknowledge it overtly or subtly, but find a way to get the thing moving. Because the last thing you want to do is have people kind of checking out because they've sensed that you've lost them. That's an awkward place to be.
Yeah.
So there's probably lots more we could say about flow, and maybe more you could say listening to this. So please do chip in with comments on whichever platform you're following this. We'd love to hear any comments, any thoughts on where you get stuck, where you find this flow becomes an issue, or even as a listener where you find you recognize the flow stopping or some of the features of that. We'd love to hear more thoughts about that. It's not an exhausted subject.
Not at all.
Not at all. Just as we like to finish with a Bible verse, I find 1 Thessalonians super encouraging. Paul was in Thessalonica very briefly, but then he writes this letter back to them and describes their response in chapter 1, verses 9 and 10. It says, "For they themselves report concerning us the kind of reception we had among you, and how you turned to God from idols to serve the living and true God and to wait for his Son from heaven." So you got that sort of 3-part response. They turn to God from idols, they serve God, and they're waiting for Jesus. Like, wow, what an impact his ministry had. But just a little phrase that introduces that kind of stood out to me. The reception we had among you. The kind of reception. So there's the responsiveness of the listeners, but they're being responsive to the message that Paul was preaching. And really, that's kind of what we're anticipating as we think about preaching and wanting to preach with flow. It's not so that people say, oh, you're very flowy. Your preaching is so smooth. Like, that's not the goal. The goal is that you don't want people distracted from what it is that you have to share. You've got a treasure. You want them to receive it. And so we're thinking through, how can we make sure that we do whatever we can and pray that God will help us with that, but also pray that there will be a receptive heart on the other side that receives what we share. And so, that phrase, the reception we had among you, that's the goal for not our preaching, but for the word of God to come through us and to land well in open, ready, responsive hearts. That's Christian ministry. That's exciting. Love it when that happens.
Yeah, that's so good. Thank you, Peter, and thank you again for joining us on this episode. We really are grateful for all of your following and listening and comments, and we will be back again soon on another episode.
Yep. See you soon.
Thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate every positive review, like, share, and comment. And thank you for praying for us. We hope you will join us again next time on the Biblical Preaching Podcast.